you can't always necessarily take the word of the responding police officer, and certainly not the word of someone's insurance company that's maybe looking to limit having to pay you something fair if that, some of their insured has hurt you.
Do you know what UIM insurance is, and do you have enough of it? Well, that's what we're going to ask the lawyer on this episode. Hi, everybody. I'm Rob Rosenthal with AskTheLawyers.com. My guest today is attorney Trent Shuping with the Warshauer Law Group in Atlanta. Trent, thank you for making some time to answer our questions.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
Let's start with a little bit of a definition. Explain what UM and UIM insurance is.
Sure, absolutely. UIM, oftentimes the terms are used interchangeably, but it refers to uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage. And what that is coverage that someone buys for themselves. So that if you are in a wreck with a driver who either doesn't have any insurance at all, or perhaps they have insurance with limits that don't cover the extent of your losses, this insurance that you've purchased for yourself will provide a recovery for you, a source of recovery for you, so that you can hopefully be closer to fully compensated for your damages in that car wreck.
Now, I know in some states there's a minimum amount that is required. Is that the case in Georgia?
That is. So, for instance, in Georgia, oftentimes you hear the TV advertisements where they'll advertise and say, we'll help you be legal for less. Well, when they say we'll help you be legal, what they're referring to is providing you with the minimum insurance coverage of liability insurance coverage. And the liability insurance coverage is what covers the person that you hurt. So, for instance, if I have $25,000, which in Georgia is the minimum limits, if I have $25,000 in liability insurance and I cause a wreck, that means that the most amount of money that my insurance company will pay the people that I hurt is $25,000. Now, for those people, let's say that they're hurt worse than $25,000, their amount of damages is higher than that amount. If they don't have uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage, then they will just be left, having to bear the burden of those damages that exceed my policy limits. So, it's one of the most important kinds of insurance that you have, frankly, because it protects you from people on the road that either have no insurance at all or that are driving with absolute minimum limits of insurance, which, for a lot of folks, and depending obviously on the severity of the wreck and the injuries, lots of times there's wrecks where the damages will far exceed $25,000.
Is there a cap? Is there a limit on how much UM or UIM insurance you can get? And how expensive is it?
Good questions. There's, at the end of the day, it's a contract you enter, so there's not necessarily a cap. I suspect insurance companies will probably sell you as much as you want to purchase. That said, you generally are going to need to increase your liability coverage as you increase your UIM coverage. And the cost of it really is something that to me is so important, because in the grand scheme of things, obviously, everybody's watching every dollar and every dollar counts, and you hate to spend more for insurance. But in the grand scheme of insurance that you're purchasing, it's really one of the best bargains for your money is to purchase uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage. And it can certainly prevent you from having a horrible situation. For example, I represent a lot of railroad workers. And if you work for the railroad, it's a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week type enterprise. And so if you work for the road, you may be driving to work at 3:30 in the morning when there's a lot of drunk drivers on the road. Lots of things can happen. Oftentimes they're transporting other people's cars. And so, if you're a railroad worker, for instance, and you're driving to work at 3:30 in the morning and you get hit by a drunk driver, that drunk driver likely is not going to have, a lot of insurance, if any at all. And if you work in a job where even a, theoretically sort of relatively minor type injury might keep you out of work for a couple of months, you're going to be looking at substantial losses that are going to far exceed either the zero coverage or minimal coverage that driver may have. It's just a good thing for all of us to have, and it prevents you from being in that situation where you're injured, you go to an attorney and you say, well, how much can I recover? I've lost, $100,000 in income. And the attorney looks at you and says, I'm sorry, the person that hit you either doesn't have insurance or they had minimal coverage, and the only thing that's going to be available to you is the $25,000 policy limits.
What about in a situation, say, where there's a hit and run, where the driver of the other vehicle leaves the scene? Does it help you in those situations too?
It does, absolutely. And that's, an example of one of the areas where it actually comes into play a lot. Obviously, if there's a hit and run, then you don't even necessarily know the other driver that hit you. Even if the police are able to track them down, oftentimes the person doing the hit and run is probably not going to have a lot of insurance coverage. Maybe they've been in car wrecks before. Right. They're clearly not somebody who's necessarily looking to take responsibility for the harm that they cause to others by nature of their running. So that's definitely when it comes into play, because you are able then to For instance, you name a John Doe if you need to file a lawsuit, but you're able to recover against your own uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage.
What if I'm not sure who caused the accident, Trent, or maybe the fault is not clearly all on one side or the other? How does that figure in?
Well, oftentimes I think it might be a good idea to, it's a good time always to consult with a lawyer. Sometimes we can help people sort through things.
Sure.
And, frankly, sometimes we do talk to people and we'll explain to them, well, look, we don't really think that this is a case where the other person was at fault. Other times there may be things that person didn't consider. They may not necessarily be fully aware of the law, rules of the road, that kind of thing. At the end of the day, we're honest lawyers. We bring honest cases for good people. But we're always happy to help people evaluate that because the law, varies from state to state. But for instance, in Georgia, you're still able to recover as long as you're not up to 50% responsible.
Okay.
So even if a driver, for instance, is maybe 10% responsible for causing a wreck, the other party is 90% responsible, then the party that's 90% responsible is going to be liable for 90% of those damages. And, I certainly will say that you can't always necessarily take the word of the responding police officer and certainly not the word of someone's insurance company that's maybe looking to limit having to pay you something fair if some of their insured has hurt you.
What's your advice if someone's been in an accident and maybe they know at the scene, maybe the other person says, I don't have insurance. Is there any difference in the process that someone should go through after being in an accident like that than any other accident, Trent?
Well, I don't know that the advice necessarily changes based on, whether the other person has insurance, but some of the things that I would advise someone to do in any circumstance become even more so important in that case where the other driver may not have insurance or have adequate insurance. So anytime anyone's in a wreck, they're going to want to obviously make sure you get a police report. Even if, particularly, I should say, if it's a hit and run type situation, you're going to want to stop and get a police report and document that. Your insurance company is going to want to need that. And you're going to have some hard time proving that this happened. They're going to essentially call you a liar and say it didn't happen unless you stop and document that by filing the police report. You're also the good news about having a police report is the police will try and find out information about the other driver's insurance, and that will maybe let you know early on if they actually do have valid insurance or don't. It'll also help you allow that information put in the police report so you'll know who their insurance company is, although not necessarily their limits. But the one thing I think a lot of people know to do that. The one thing that's also vitally important if you're in a wreck is to contact your own insurance company. And many people aren't aware, really even aware if they have underinsured motorist coverage or not. A lot of people have it and don't know they have it, have never really thought about it, what it is, what it's for. But one of the most important things if you're going to access your uninsured coverage is to make sure that you notify your own insurance company so that they can't later on argue that they were deprived of the ability to investigate the incident. You don't want to wait a couple of months later and then say, hey, by the way, I was in this wreck a year ago. And turns out the person that hit me didn't have insurance. You might have some problems recovering then. So it's vitally important that you let your own insurance company know that you were in a wreck. And obviously, if the other person is at fault, you're going to want to let them know and say, hey, this other person is at fault, but I want to let you know in case I need to access my uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage. And, lots of times people will not want to do that. They're afraid that if they let their own insurance company know they were in a wreck, even if it wasn't their fault, that their rates will go up.
Right.
But trust me, the risk of not notifying them is so much greater than any risk that your rates go up. And, if they raise your rates, then what I would advise someone to do is just to go ahead and shop around, and you'll likely be able to find another company that will give you a better rate. And
I would imagine also get an attorney on your side as early as possible, especially if there's injuries involved, right?
Absolutely. Particularly if there's injuries involved, you're going to want to do that. One of the things, anytime you get an attorney involved, they're going to know the right steps to take, who you need to notify, and be able to dot the I's and cross the T's, even in the simplest, most straightforward set of facts. And if there's anything more complex, then you're certainly going to have an experienced person who knows the law guiding you through that process.
Great advice, Trent. Thank you so much for helping us and answering our questions today.
Thanks, Rob.
That's going to do it for this episode of Ask the Lawyer. My guest has been attorney Trent Shuping with the Warshauer Law Group in Atlanta. If you want the best information or you're ready to choose a lawyer that lawyers choose, we recommend you head over to askthelawyer.com. First, also please take a second to like, share, and subscribe below. Thanks for watching. I'm Rob Rosenthal with askthelawyer.com.